Thank you, Dr. Rima. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Prof. Abdullahi, Prof. Waleed Faris, YB Sari Sungai, Prof. Jomo, and friends and colleagues, Datuk, Tan Sri. I'm very honored to be hosting Prof. Abdullahi again for the second time in KL. I think the first time he stayed here much longer, and I think we traveled to Penang as well, right? Yeah. We spent a few days in Penang, but this time it's going to be a very short trip. He's leaving tomorrow. We just had a session last night, and I have also to apologize that there are two other panelists who are unable to be here today. Prof. Hunud, who is the head of Department of the Kulliyyah of Law in the International Islamic University of Malaysia, but he attended our reading session last night with Prof. Naim, and we had a good discussion. And secondly, this Prof. Shad Faruqi, he apologized as well because he had to attend dinner function iftar with the Tunku of Sultan of Perak, and I think that we hope that we have more time for discussion later on before iftar. And I understand that many of you also perhaps have an appointment somewhere else, so we hope to finish it by 7:15 latest, and this particular topic is being chosen because the book we are launching is about Toward an Islamic Reformation, a very important book written by Prof. Naim, a book which was banned by the previous government, previous regime. We'll see how it goes with this new transition and within this new book, whether it's going to face the same fate or not, whether this new government has so-called reform-minded agenda in their mind. We'll see how it goes, in a few weeks' time or a few months' time. But the most important thing that we want to address is whether there is a real need for an Islamic reformation. Because as what we have written in the abstract for this particular forum, is that some quarters of the people, especially some Muslims as well, believe that because we have a different history from Christianity and we do not have a central power like the Vatican, so we do not need another Martin Luther in Islam. Of course, Mustafa Akil argued that perhaps we don't need Martin Luther. What we need actually is John Locke, another John Locke in our community. We can argue about this, but the most important thing is that we want to hear what Prof. Naim has to say about his idea on this Islamic information. With that, I would like to call upon Professor Abdullahi Naim to deliver his speech. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. I begin by a profound apology for being late. Actually, I was waiting in a different space in this hotel thinking that that event will be there. And the people who were in charge could not tell me exactly where to look, and that's how the delay happened. Because I don't believe that delay is something that we should take lightly. It reflects, and unfortunately it is part of Muslim cultures almost everywhere, that we tend to be that we tend to be late and we don't see a problem with that. And I think that that's where we need to start, to respect people's times and people's dignity in everything that we do or fail to do constantly. It is not a question of we do it on occasions, and for that I apologize for having been guilty of something that I have profoundly objected to previously. I will hope to be able to explain what I'm trying to do without taking too much of your time, so that maybe you can hear the other discussants, and also if you have any questions and so on. To start with a note on the title, The title of the book in English is called Toward an Islamic Reformation. So it is heading towards an Islamic Reformation. It is not an actual Islamic Reformation. My purpose in trying to present this text was to present an approach, a methodology, a strategy that is heading in the direction of reform, but not to exhaust the process of reform or to even present it in a definitive way. And I think it's important that we understand that we all need to contribute to the structures, the institutions, the methodologies that we can hope to benefit from being Muslims and from Islam being our religion, which is a profound blessing to all of us, but we will never exhaust our understanding of Islam or how it can be practiced and by whom. So my effort was to say, let me do this to begin presenting this notion of an Islamic Reformation. And the title, by the way, was, as often those who publish may have experienced this, the publisher has a lot of say in the title, because to them, the title is the way in which the book will be presented, and maybe people will buy it, people will take... so they have a skill in trying to use the title. And I found, he suggested, I found no problem with it, and that's how it came to be. The second point I would like to emphasize is that whatever it is that about Islam, it is our human understanding of Islam. It is never Islam itself. No human being on this earth after the Prophet ﷺ can claim to understand Islam exhaustively or can present Islam in the first person. It's always about, in my view, this is the position that Muslims should take. It is never more than that. And we know that in our own tradition, historically, that is always what Muslim scholars did. They never present or attempted or pretended to present a definitive view. Each single one of them will say, will speak about what is common in her or his understanding and what is different, and always close with Allahu A'lam. That Allahu A'lam is to emphasize that whatever I said is nothing than human conjecture, that human projection of an understanding. And it is by being human is definitely going to be faulty. It's never going to be exhaustive. It is never going to be precisely and accurately. But we have to make the effort, knowing that it is only an effort, but never exhaustive. In my view, I think that what we need, because there is so much for the last 200 years or so, Muslims have written about Islam and Islamic reform and Islamic revival, scores of thousands of books, I would say, and they have campaigned and all of that. So this is not new, but I think that we need always to examine our methods, our strategies, with a view to improving our delivery of the message that we think might make a difference. So in my view, understanding was about, it is a methodology of reform and not the actual reform. Meaning that we, instead of speaking about Islam at large, about the Quran at large, we should be disciplined in speaking about a methodology for understanding Islam, a methodology for trying to live our lives according to Islamic dictates, and that it is a discourse, it is a way of talking about the issues. And I think humility is what we need, and tolerance of difference and diversity is what we need. Acceptance of the other is what we need. And unfortunately, these and other qualities that are desperately needed are lacking in our communities today. We don't seem to be willing to listen to a different point of view with patience and with respect. But rather, we tend to be impatient. And if you don't agree with me, I don't need to listen to you. And we know that that is not our tradition. Our tradition as Muslims for 1,000 years or more has been one of disagreement, of difference, but with respect, with profound humility, that I accept the possibility I could be wrong. And Shafi'i said it beautifully when he said that I believe that I am right and believe you to be wrong. And you believe that you are right and believe me to be wrong. So accepting that either of us could be right and either of us could be wrong, and the difference is how we present our ideas in a way that respects the human dignity of the other. This is what I would like to emphasize to begin with. The book, as you will hopefully, inshallah, read it in Malay now, and I'm grateful for this translation, is an effort to try to explain this and to document and to substantiate the argument that is being made from Quran and Hadith and from other sources of Muslim and other scholars of Islam. But the point is that it is really an effort to communicate, knowing that human beings are drawn to miscommunication more than we are drawn to communication. It is very easy to misunderstand. It's very easy to rush to judgment. And what we need to discipline ourselves is to step back and give a chance that you may have misheard, you may have misread, you may have misunderstood what is being said. So instead of rushing to bad judgment or about the other, سوء الظن بالناس. And I think some of you may be familiar with the hadith in which the Nabi ﷺ said that there are two qualities which are the worst in human behavior, which is سوء الظن بالله وسوء الظن بالناس. And there are two qualities which are the best in human behavior: حسن الظن بالله وحسن الظن بالناس. So the Prophet is emphasizing that we should begin with حسن الظن and not with سوء الظن. So that is again emphasizing the need to be patient and to be compassionate and to be humble in our understanding. So as I said, I'm grateful that the book now is in Malay, and I realized that when I said it first in Arabic in my own sort of upbringing and as a student of law in Khartoum in 50 years ago or more, that I may have misunderstood, may have misrepresented to begin with. Then when I wrote it in English, I'm sure that I must have misrepresented and misunderstood. And now that it is presented to you in a translation, please allow the chance that it may be also misunderstood and misrepresented. The point is that I'm not going to try to exhaust the argument, and I hope that as you read, you will reach out to me, and I'm happy to talk. Now, fortunately, it is very easy to communicate globally, and we can do that. But to see that the nature of the conversation is one of, as I said, trying to give the best possible shadow or reflection of meaning on the point that is being made. But I would like just briefly to touch on the point about al-nasikh wal-mansukh. Because it is, of course, in Islamic discourse, historically, that is a field of tremendous scholarship. Volumes and volumes. I used as a student when I was studying and writing this, I had 2 volumes by an Egyptian scholar, edited by an Egyptian scholar, about al-nasikh wal-mansukh. And that it is a vast field. Now, the point that I follow my teacher, Ustad Muhammad Ibn in making, is that there is a point in al-nasikh wal-mansukh. Al-nasikh is not arbitrary. And it is deliberate to reflect the values of the community at a point of its development in the 7th century of the Common Era, which is when Islam started to develop and to spread across the world. That it is al-nasikh wal-mansukh, the point is that the Quran speaks of al-nasikh wal-mansukh, but it does not tell us which is which. The hadith speaks about an-nasikh wal-mansukh and does not tell us which is which. I invite you to continue researching and look and see anywhere in the Quran or in hadith where the Rabbana subhanahu wa ta'ala or the Prophet defined what is what and which is which. I don't believe that you will find it. So in that case, therefore, it is whatever it is that it is presented as an effort to discover what it is that is nasikh and what it is that is mansukh. But we do not have a definitive answer because the Prophet ﷺ died leaving a nasikh wal mansukh mansukh. But it did not exhaust which is which. Therefore, the idea itself is an idea of saying that if we really look closely, we will see that in the Quran of Mecca, there is so much compassion and acceptance of the human dignity of the other, respect for the human condition and confusion that exists, and that there is no really rush to judgment. In fact, we have many examples that we tend to. It's interesting that always in Friday prayer, we come up with the best texts from Hadith and Quran that convey the profound beauty and humanity of Quranic texts. But in our day-to-day life, we fail to live up to that. So the point is that when you look, you see that there is so much in the Quran of Mecca that deserves to be lived up to today. Equality for women, respect for equal dignity of men and women, for humanity at large. That the Quran in Mecca always addresses humanity at large. Ya ayyuhan nas, ya bani Adam. Whereas in the Quran of Medina, it became more specific because it is addressing a particular community. Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu. So there is more than just simply a difference in the manner in which people are addressed. It is also in the level of the people who are being addressed, and so on. So please read and reflect and let me know what you think, and I would be grateful for any correction that you may wish to offer. I do not really wish to take too much of your time on this, and invite you to read and let me know. Now, but there is a question about, I think, the presentation that we heard about, what about today? Where do we go from here? Muslims today are 1.8 billion. It is the second largest religion among human beings all over, everywhere. 1.8 billion. There are more than 45 or almost 50 countries where Muslims are the majority of the population. There are, in fact, again, many factors that we need to consider. For example, the Quran and the Hadith and all the Turas was in Arabic, but the vast majority of Muslims today do not read or understand Arabic. And they have to get it in translation or through communication by people who understand these sources in their own experience. And therefore, whenever we listen to each other, when we listen to an imam or we listen to a scholar expounding ideas, we should understand that this is this personal understanding. But the point is, what do? We try to write, we try to speak, we try to communicate, but we understand that there are limitations to what we can do with this. There is extreme diversity among Muslims. That I think in the other book that it's called Islam and the Secular State, I tried to present some images and ideas about the extreme diversity of Muslim thinking, choices, lifestyle, types of ideological and social institutions, and so on. Vast differences. That we know that there are many Muslims who do not accept other Muslims as Muslims. And unfortunately, we tend to rush to judgment, to takfir, to assume that someone who disagrees with me must be a kafir. Why? Because he disagrees with me. That's all that I can say. I cannot say because he does not speak the truth, because I do not know the truth, neither does he. We both think that we understand and know, but we cannot be confident that is the case. Again, there is a significant marker in our development as global Muslim community is that this notion of the nation state and the experience with colonialism. Colonialism, again, has been a profoundly powerful force in our lives, and whether we like it or not, it is part of our history and has so far been part of our future that the world as we know it and the experiences that we have of it are no longer understood simply in terms of we are Muslim, they are Christian, or they are Kafirs even for those who are. It is much more than that. We live together in partnership. Whether we like it or not, we have to accept the reality of other people, of other faces, of other lifestyles and choices and philosophies who are with us day by day. Even more, we cannot afford our level of technology, our level of development of wealth, our knowledge of defense even, is not, none of that is really anything to match those who are not Muslims. And we are required to submit, and we are required to be humble and to be honest about our limitations. When you look now around the world and you see one of the most tragic and the most shameful episodes is what we see now in Yemen, for example, or in Libya, or in Syria. And Iraq has just come, and Afghanistan has been. So we have seen how so-called Muslim nations have supported and promoted Western non-Muslim aggression against Muslims for decades. We see now Saudi Arabia, which pretends to be the guardian of the two holy sites of Islam, paying Americans for technology and for weapons to destroy children in Yemen, to destroy whole Muslim communities. Is it because they are Shia and you are Sunni so-called, because you think that you are, neither are you Sunni nor are they Shia, because these ideologies are just simply political tools today. They do not reflect the profound nature of those differences among Muslims. But we align ourselves with Israel. We buy and pay billions and billions of dollars to buy American weapons to destroy Muslim communities. And there is a war that's going on in Libya for more than 2 decades now almost, since the mid-90s, and Muslims are just watching. They are doing nothing to stop and to put an end to that. Think of what happened in Syria until recently and continues. Because with Russia's support, the Assad regime continues to repress and to suppress the Muslim population of Syria. What have we got to that to answer? Look at the Americans and what they did in Iraq. Look at the Americans and before them the Russians and what they did in Afghanistan. With all of this going on, are we not ashamed to speak of ourselves as Muslims? But the point is not to raise sort of our emotions and our temperament about this, but to acknowledge the really backward and regressive position that we share in the world. And where do we start? Start by correcting ourselves. We have to start by the way in which the Quran and the Hadith and the Sunnah and the Seerah, as it was mentioned of the Prophet ﷺ, all of these are tools in our toolkit in order to improve the quality of our humanity, our technological competence. So when we were of that standard, we were globally the most significant power and the most significant civilizations. But now we are not, and that's where we need to start. There is also dimensions of the colonial that we have to challenge today. But that it's not just simply by saying that we are a product of colonial experiences. It's not the end of the story. It's a beginning, actually. That colonialism has come to be. Has it left really? Or do we remain colonized in our minds and hearts? Where do we look for guidance? Where do we look for good example? There is a very telling issue that sometimes one can reflect on. When we have political persecution of our freedom fighters and people who are rebelling against regimes in their countries, none of them takes refuge in other Muslim majority countries. All of them go to Western countries. Look and see, Rashid Ghannouchi, for example, Hassan Turabi for Sudan, and many others. Where do they go when they are persecuted by their own regimes? They don't go to other Muslim countries. Who went to Saudi Arabia or to Iraq or to any of these countries seeking political refuge? Because we know that we will not find it. But they go to England and they are granted the freedom to speak and to organize and to continue their political struggle, whereas the country that is hosting them is opposed to what they are trying to do, but respects their human right and human dignity in seeking to do. The point for me is just to be, again, humble and to understand our limitations. If we want to be truly Muslim, to challenge each other, then we should be Muslim enough for other Muslims to seek our refuge, not for them to escape from our communities. But still, as I said, and I will not take, by the way, I have this very bad habit. I keep saying I will not take long, and I continue actually to take long. So I hope that I will honor my promise this time. There's the question of international law and international relations. Because I teach this field for decades, and I struggle with it, because always I'm very, very sad to see the ways in which the rule of law in international relations is so much lacking. And it is lacking by conspiracies that include us, that we do not challenge our own governments to take a position as a matter of principle in questions of international law and international legality. We do not pressure our governments to protect human rights, which are international obligations that we assume. The Quran emphasized that we have to respect our pledges, our commitments, but we don't. And we enter into these international treaties with the intention of gaining international legitimacy, but not with the intention of actually honoring the obligation that we assume. They could be against torture. They could be for the rights of women, the rights of children, all sorts of fundamental human rights and dignity that we take obligations for, but we do not honor. And we look to Western powers to honor our obligations for us. We go to the United Nations, we go to Geneva, we go to other locations under the United Nations garb and flag, but really not with the intention of complying. So the point here is simply for me is that international law is not divine, absolutely not. It's a product of European politics, by the way. It is an inter-European system, it is not an international system. It emerged out of the relationship among European powers in the 19th century, and that the non-European powers which sought to be part of it were required to submit to its principles before being admitted to the so-called Club of Nations. Turkey, the Ottoman Empire, and Japan had to really submit and show their ability to comply before being admitted into the company of nations. But throughout the 20th century too, many Muslim majority countries came to sort of independence and achieve freedom to rule themselves, but after submitting to the European principles of international law that were presented to them and that were required of them. And the simple rule is that no nation can be admitted to the United Nations without a vote of existing members of the United Nations, which has to start with a recommendation by the Security Council and then a vote by the General Assembly. Every nation that has been admitted to the membership of the United Nations has to do this. But of course, when you say the Security Council, what you mean is that the 5 permanent members, United States, Britain, France, China, and Russia. So every nation that is admitted has to get the approval of these 5, because any of them could block by a veto vote that membership. So the sole international organizations to which we can all belong and from which we all seek assistance is conditional upon our submission to this international system. I don't mean to incite rebellion, but to say that, okay, we are bound by this. This is the law of nations. We respect it, but what is our contribution to it? It is not as if we had nothing to say about this. In fact, Ashibani, and I'm sure who wrote about the seer, was in the 8th century, was a global scholar of international law and international relations. Because he called it seer, we don't accept it now, and he should be as closely studied as any of the European so-called founders of international law. But our own scholars, when they seek to understand, they don't read the Shibani. They read European scholars in this field. So I'm saying that we have such a complex about our own contributions to civilized humanity that we are not willing to protect it and to uphold it and to present it to the world. Finally, to close, to say that the question about the post-colonial and what I call the neo-colonial, that colonialism is not over. And in fact, its hold on our imagination, its hold on our ability to think rationally and to act with decency and justice is more defined by European powers than it is by our own history. And that's why it is a question for us, is a challenging question. It is not the sentiment of talking about Sharia and getting fanatical about that. And we know that people kill in the name of Sharia in ways that Sharia would condemn utterly. All the conduct of so-called international organizations and terrorist organizations that seek to, in the name of promoting Sharia, behave in ways that has nothing to do with Sharia. And the rest of us are not willing to speak up, to say, no, what you do is wrong from a Sharia point of view. Now, we disagree and differ about what we think Sharia is and how to interpret it, but any understanding of it will never condone the murder of children, the murder of women, that is carried on now, today, as we speak, by Saudi bombing of Yemen. And none of us is willing to speak up because it's Saudi Arabia. So the point, therefore, I think there is a lot, with all due respect, and I appeal to you, please read this book with a level of patience and try to understand, even when my argument and my language is not that conducive and persuasive. Because there is so much homework we need to do before we have the right to tell anybody else what to do. Whether it is our next dear Muslim or man or woman or our across the world co-human being. Thank you very much.